if ancient laws about things like mixed fabrics and lost oxen weren't just a random list of rules? What if they were actually a detailed blueprint for building the perfect society? Today, we're going to dig into one Bible study's really interesting interpretation of Deuteronomy, which argues that these ancient commands were designed to build a world on three pillars: purity, justice, and compassion.
So, where does this whole interpretation get started? Well, right here. The source we're looking at, a YouTube Bible study, kicks things off by diving straight into the scripture. This really sets the stage for how they're going to unpack these ancient texts for us.
And this is really the central question, isn't it? What on earth do rules about the clothes you wear, how you plant your fields, and who you marry all have in common? Well, according to the source we're examining, they are not random at all. Nope, they're like physical signposts, all pointing to much deeper spiritual truths. So let's find out what those are.
All right, so the first pillar of this ancient blueprint, according to our source, is all about purity. The idea is that maintaining a really clear separation, in your clothes, in your fields, and most importantly, in your faith, is the foundation for absolutely everything else that follows.
And here's exactly how the source connects those dots. These physical rules, like not mixing wool and linen together or not planting different kinds of seeds in the same field, are seen as these daily physical reminders of a huge spiritual principle. Keep your faith pure. Don't mix it with other beliefs. Just stay aligned with God's intended order.
Now, this principle of purity gets taken to its most serious conclusion with the laws on adultery. The source explains that the death penalty for physical cheating was meant to be this powerful, real-world lesson. It argues that because the Bible often describes Israel's relationship with God as a marriage, well, worshiping other gods was seen as spiritual adultery, the ultimate act of impurity.
But this blueprint, it wasn't just about some internal spiritual purity. Our source argues it was meant to extend outward, to create a truly just and fair society. So this next set of laws, they're like the rule book for civil life, and they cover everything from the courtroom right into the family home.
And here's a crucial point the source makes. Even justice had to be humane. Punishment had clear limits. A flogging, for instance, was capped at 40 lashes. See, the goal wasn't just revenge, it was correction, a way to discipline someone without completely destroying their dignity.
And this is a fantastic example of that law in action. The study points to the Apostle Paul, who, centuries later, mentions receiving 39 lashes, just one less than the maximum, maybe as a way to make absolutely sure they didn't miscount and break the law. It just goes to show how this legal principle was carried forward in Jewish tradition for a long, long time. Now, here's a law that's all about social stability. This idea of levirate marriage. It wasn't about romance. It was a critical social mechanism. The source explains it had two main jobs. First, to make sure the dead brother's name and family line didn't just disappear, and second, to keep property and inheritance right there within the family clan.
And justice didn't stop at the courthouse steps. It went straight into the marketplace. The source really highlights this rule against dishonest weights, using a heavy one when you buy and a light one when you sell. This wasn't just seen as minor cheating. It was viewed as a direct attack on the economic fabric of the entire community. Okay, so we've got purity and we've got justice, but the source identifies a third, absolutely crucial thread woven all through these laws, a radical kind of compassion for the most vulnerable people in society, the poor, the foreigner, and the powerless.
The source points to a whole bunch of laws that basically acted like an ancient social safety net. I mean, think about it. Farmers were required to leave grain in the fields for the poor to gather. Workers had to be paid that very same day. Lenders couldn't just take a person's only means of survival as collateral. They were even told to give refuge to escaped slaves from other lands. It's this whole pattern of, you could call it mandated compassion.
This is a really unique one. A man in his first year of marriage didn't have to go to war. And why? The text explicitly says it's to bring happiness to his wife. The source sees this as a guideline for building strong families from the very beginning, recognizing that the health of that new family unit was vital to the health of the entire nation. Okay, now we've got to turn to some of the most challenging parts of this text. The source directly addresses the laws that define who belongs to the community of Israel, what's called the Assembly of the Lord, and it outlines a command for what we would probably call holy war.
So, the source uses this breakdown to show that the boundaries of who was in and who was out were actually pretty complex. Some exclusions were permanent, yeah, but what's fascinating is the nuance for others. Edomites and Egyptians weren't banned forever, their descendants could join after 3 generations.
The source argues this was all based on specific historical relationships, showing that these rules weren't just arbitrary, they were rooted in memory and experience. So how does the source even begin to explain this incredibly severe command? Well, it frames it as a direct response to a very specific historical event. The Amalekites were to be completely blotted out because they had attacked the weakest of the Israelites, the stragglers at the back of the line, during their escape from Egypt. This act was seen as an attack on God himself and one that required a total and final judgment.
So what's the one thread that ties all of this together? The purity, the justice, the compassion, and even those really harsh exclusions. The argument argues that it all comes down to one central idea, a special agreement or a covenant between God and the nation of Israel.
And this covenant was presented as a two-way street, a kind of cycle. The people would bring their offerings and publicly commit to following the laws. And in return, God would formally recognize them as his special, treasured people, giving them a unique identity and a mission in the world.
And this right here is the key takeaway from the source's entire interpretation. This special status as a holy nation wasn't just for Israel's own benefit. The ultimate goal was for them to act as priests for the rest of the world, to be a model society whose unique laws and relationship with God would eventually draw all the other nations to him.
So we end on this. This whole explainer has been a deep dive into one specific interpretation of an ancient legal and social code. But it brings up a much bigger question that we all face when we look at historical texts. How do we bridge that massive gap between their world and ours? And what does it even mean to find timeless principles within rules that are so deeply rooted in a very specific time and a very specific place?